Hello, Wake Up New Zealand, Cassie speaking. British Parliament. Now, everyone's looking at British Parliament, what's happening right now. We're looking at Reform, we're looking at Advance, we're looking at Conservative, Labour, you name it, we're looking at it. It's disgusting, it's messy, it's all falling apart. People are up in arms right across the country, and this weekend we've got 1 million people who will be marching in London. Good old Tommy Robinson. And I must say, I'm glad that Brian Tamaki is going with the boys to do a haka. And Tommy Robinson is looking after them, and Brian Tamaki and his wife. So good on them. So, British Parliament, Islamic financing to implement the UN Global Agenda 2030, transforming our lives 2030 without your permission. So, John Glenn, he's an MP for Conservative Party. He has been since 2010. So, he's the Secretary to the Treasurer, and he is influential in the British Parliament's Islamic financing of the global agenda. Yes, I said it. Islamic financing of the global agenda, global development goals, transforming our lives. The core message being leaving no one behind. Well, by mass migration in Britain and other countries, certainly not leaving anyone behind, are they? And they keep on coming. 9th of December 2020, the Ethical Finance Exchange reported that John Glenn, MP, Islamic Finance and the SDG Global Taskforce gathering. And John Glenn made a YouTube video speaking about this gathering in 2020, Islamic Finance that better integrates the UN Global Agenda, Global Goals, SDGs by 2030. His speech was given at the Islamic Finance SDG Global Taskforce gathering, and there were other Islamic financing institutions present at the time. So John Glenn, the UK Economic Secretary to the Treasury, speaker at the Islamic Finance Council in UK. So the theme was there needed more money, more funding to fill the gap to achieve UN Agenda 2030. SDGs, as John Glenn spoke about welcoming diversity as he referred to the Islamic finance sector, referring to the Islamic finance sector, referring to COVID-19, health and economy, and what a challenge it is as far as money and health is concerned, that lessons can be learned by that. And he went on to say the meeting at the Islamic Finance Council will encourage engagement between Islamic institutions that were present at the meeting and the finance needed to implement the global goals. That he welcomes the diversity of UK's Islamic finance sector and the relevance of Islamic finance sector in pointing out that there are 17 sources on the London Stock Exchange of offering Islamic finance services in the UK. So the British government is committed to strengthening the Islamic banking sector, which ensures Britain remains the leading Western hub for financing foreign Islamic compliant Sharia law principles to finance the global goals. In 2020, Britain was already buying 2 sovereign Islamic sukuk. They're certificates, Islamic certificates that mirror bonds in Western finance. They're sold to investors usually to gain partial ownership in an asset purchased with those funds. Also, certificates that are used by Islamic corporations, trillions of dollars are needed to fulfill that gap for the UN Agenda 2030, SDGs. So that huge gap, what have they done? They've looked to the Islamic global financing institutions, the political, financial, corporate agenda. The British Parliament aligns itself with the principle of Sharia law to advance the Global Agenda 2030. This is what John Glenn said, referring to the upcoming UNIPCC COP gathering, climate action gathering of the UN in Glasgow in November 2021. So he said that individual bank finance organisations will be there, and he said that they need to gain capital to withstand risks to generate capital required for low carbon future of Britain, for renewable energies, low carbon transport, clean technologies. But John Glenn then went on to say he hoped that the Islamic Taskforce can use Islamic finance to support the climate action agenda, as there are opportunities for the Islamic finance agenda, great opportunities for the stakeholders, public-private partnerships, filling the gaps to finance Global Agenda 2030. So he said it was an ongoing program, the borrowing for green sustainability to align UN Agenda 2030 global development goals with faith principles, Islamic Sharia faith principles, he said. He referred to the UN Blending Islamic Finance and Impact Investing Survey on the 2030 Global Development Goals, SDGs, where Islamic banks rank importance to each one of those global goals, SDGs, 17 of them. So, global development goals to transform our world as part of their business. November 2019, the Islamic Development Bank for Sustainable Finance framework, which was founded in 1973, became observer at the UN Assembly, gained observer status. So UN reference to the Islamic Development Bank having undertaken a number of initiatives on youth development between 2019 and 2025 in partnership with the UN as being relevant to the global SDGs, where global Islamic finance is impacting the investment platform for blending Islamic financing and the private sector resources that promote institutional cooperation. And we go back to July 2015, Ethiopia, UN adopted the Addis Ababa Agreement gathering, addressed the financing of Global Agenda 2030 and the financing of migration. To expand it, partnerships, improving data collection to progress migration. So it's been widely reported that Islamic terrorist groups such as Hamas use money and move it around. So the Atlantic Council reported in March 2024 that Hamas has a large investment portfolio, despite having sanctions against them, because there are gaps there in those sanctions among Western jurisdictions as well. The allies and partners, it was said, need to share the same level of understanding about terrorism threat and the risk of terrorist financing that poses to the global financial system. So there was an investigation into the recent worldwide rise in Islamic banking and the attempts of Islamists to use Islamic banking to Islamize societies. So to indoctrinate societies into Islam, get them on board. See the protests in London, Australia, Ireland. You have to wonder about that, don't you? So how does this all relate to anti-Semitism? Just follow the money? This being a form of finance particularly susceptible to misuse. So the misuse of money through Islamic financing. Islamic financing trying to leverage terrorism. So, with Islamic banks have been tied to terrorist organisations through various Islamic charities, Islamic banks. Islamic banks are financing Islamic terrorism. So, question, the Islamic Global Financial Institutions, and what is that Islamic institution doing at the UN? Of course, Pan-Arab Socialist, the Islamic Development Bank that has observer status at the UN, John Glenn, Conservative Party MP, and his embracing the faith principle of Sharia law, Sharia compliant banking and investment opportunities. Has this global Islamic financing of UN Global Agenda 2030 transforming our lives impacted on all of this migration of Islamists, Muslims into the West? Should we be following the money? Has this impacted on this mass anti-Semitism, anti-Christianity, the cruel impact on the British people of mass migration? Are other UN member states also using Islamic institutions to fund their global agenda goals? How much control do these Islamic banks have? Do they want this to happen or do they not? The Islamic financing institution banks are involved in collecting religious tax, and that's called zakat. That's a 2% tithing, and distributing it to charities. What charities receive the funds? Some of these have ties to terrorist organisations. Red flags should be going off here. They should be flying. Finance institutions funding the global agenda. Islamic Global Finance Institutions, observer status at the UN, involved with funding the SDGs Global Agenda 2030, transforming our lives. British Parliament, John Glenn, MP since 2010, Conservative Party, Wake Up New Zealand.